It's time for our rugby chat now, and I'm delighted to be joined in studio by my Irish independent colleague Rúaidhrí O'Connor. Rory, happy Christmas. How are you?
Season's greetings, Will. How are you?
Very good. Yeah, we almost kind of used up all our material before the show even started. We were really getting stuck into it. We had to call a halt and say, well, I'll meet you in 10 minutes down in the studio.
Yeah, a lot to talk about.
A lot.
Rugby doesn't, like a couple of sports, rugby keeps on trucking on this time of year, and I wouldn't say it's been brilliant fair, and often it isn't at Christmas. Like these interpros, they sometimes flatter to deceive a little bit, but plenty to get stuck into at the same time. Like that's part of the talking point, I think, that like we have three really middling teams in Ireland, and then one team that look like they're getting their act together and are just on a different level. I mean, I think Leinster have already captured the Irish Shield with a couple of games to go, so they're dominant.
Vaunted Irish Shield. It's up there with the Centenary Qua in terms of like rugby.
I actually think it should be more of a big deal. It should be given a name, and it should
the
be
Anthony Foley Cup has been mooted over the years.
Yeah, I can't remember who suggested it, but that was a great idea.
It was me. Well,
I think it's a good idea, and I think it should be like, I don't know whether it comes with some sort of Leinster lifted it last year by using one of their charity partners, but maybe it's, if you win it, you get a certain amount of money for a charity of your choice, or something that makes it a big thing. Because I think being the best team in Ireland should be a prize, but at the moment it's like undisputed. They're so far ahead. I mean, Friday night was emphatic, and I'm sure really depressing for Munster fans and even Connacht and Ulster fans watching on. So
yeah,
it's been, I think, a fascinating couple of weeks, but also kind of in keeping with 2024 and that kind of question mark we have over how good things are right now in Ireland.
Yeah, a quick spin through the results for people. I'm sure most of you obviously watching and listening know, but Leinster 28-7 bonus point winners in Thomond Park on Friday night, and on Saturday night Ulster getting probably the biggest win of Richie Murphy's tenure to date, 17-7 away in Galway. The previous weekend Leinster 20-12 victors over Connacht, followed by a very interesting Mack Hansen press conference, which we'll touch on in a while. I know you were there for that. And then on the day before that, Munster with a last gasp bonus point win in Belfast 22-19, which already feels a long time ago. But Rud, we were talking off air about Christmas presents. You were denied your Sam Prendergast Jack Crowley when you were probably looking forward to unwrapping that on the 27th.
Yeah,
we were denied it when the teams were announced, so that kind of took the air out of the fixture a little bit for me, and I think a lot of other people before we'd even taken the field.
Yeah, I can. Like, we're going to talk about kind of Jack Nienaber being a strategic thinker later on, and I think if Munster are being strategic and being very realistic, Munster were being very strategic and being very realistic, they knew they'd have to, like everyone has to rest their Ireland players this time of year, and you're given a budget of time by the RFU, and it's up to you when you use that budget of time. And Leinster rested the majority of their players for the home game against Connacht, and then went down to Thomond pretty locked and loaded. I know they gave Snyman and Barrett a day off, but it was pretty much all their Ireland frontliners, bar Gibson Park, maybe one or two others. Whereas Munster looked at the fixtures, and Ian Costello and Mike Prendergast, Dennis Leamy, whoever was in the kind of discussions, were really, really realistic about it, going, we can win up in Ravenhill. That's the one we can go after, and the game that we've sold out for months in advance, the marquee game of our calendar year, we're less likely to beat Leinster. And you could say because they got 5 points in Ravenhill and that it worked for them. Yep. But I think if I'm Jack Crowley, I'm great. Like,
that's it. That was his chance to come back off the ropes, throw a few haymakers, and put himself back in the Ireland picture. And not only did he not do that, but Sam Prendergast gets man of the match.
Well, right now he's going to get a rest in during the Six Nations, because he's not starting those games anymore. Like, I think it's definitively moved to Sam Prendergast starting the Six Nations games. I think you've done the numbers on it already, but like, his November wasn't as busy as it was expected.
For the November numbers, so there was 320 minutes played in November. He only played in 133 of them, and all but 15 of those were in the first 2 weeks. So in the last 2 weeks in November, he played 15 minutes of rugby. So I am thinking, like, I know there's protocols and there's rules and there's regulations, but it doesn't kind of really make that much sense to me, considering there's a break week, unusually a break week this weekend. So Saracens are coming around the corner, but he would have had 2 weweeks off anyway.
And he did. I did the numbers towards the end of last season, just before I think it might have been just before the URC knockouts, or even just before the South Africa tour. And the two players who'd amassed the most minutes in the post World Cup season were Tadhg Byrne and Jack Crowley. So he has played an awful lot of rugby in the last 18 months, but he's a young man.
Every minute at the Six Nations.
Every minute of Six Nations. Played 80 minutes in the first test in South Africa. Played 60 minutes in the second half. Because of injuries and a lot, injuries to Joey Carberry primarily, he played a lot of minutes for Munster last season. They used him probably in games where they wouldn't have normally, but they probably went to the RFU and said, "Look, we need this guy because we need to win games." So he has backed up an awful lot of minutes, and maybe one of the reasons that he has lost form is that he's played too much rugby, and maybe he does in the long term this 2-week break could really benefit for, and he could come back refreshed and have a little holiday, which like he is entitled to, having played so much in the last year. But I'm sure when the phone call came to say, come here, you're going to Ravenhill and you're not playing against Leinster, if he's the competitive animal that I think he is, and I'd be pretty confident he is, he wants to kill Sam Prendergast in that game, within the parameters of the game. I mean, performance-wise, obviously. I mean, I heard it's, I mentioned in here before that, it got pretty testy out there during training in November. There is a proper rivalry building. I think we're not quite at Sexton O'Gara levels yet, but like, you have two players, both fairly young in their careers, who both can see that there's a vacancy and they're both going for that title. And he's like a fighter opting out of a world title bout. This was
not even opting out, being opted
out. Well, I mean, he surely. Yes, the coaches will have taken this decision in his best interest, and maybe he fought his corner. So I'm butchering boxing analogies here. We go left, right, centre, but maybe he made the case to Ian Costello, and Costello was pragmatic, as they kind of were during Europe when they rested Gavin Coombs, which again I don't think was a good decision. But they obviously went for one game in Europe with the hope of playing players in these two games. Then they get the week off, and then they'll be locked and loaded for Saracens and Northampton, their remaining European games. I think it's a little bit being too smart for your own good, and this break week that's coming does offer them a bit of an out to go to the RFU and say, look, well, surely Andy Farrell wants to see it. Like Andy Farrell, Andy Farrell / Simon Easterby, whoever's making the decision going into November, everyone wanted to see it, even from your own commercial point of view. Like, rugby, is so self-defeating sometimes. I know the game was sold out anyway, and the people who watched it on TV regardless. But the fact that we were robbed of this.
The teams were named 100%. That like everyone was talking about it, being like, oh my god, like Crowley's not even playing. And like, the point you made there is a valid one. Like, would Simon Easterby and the Ireland coaches, who ultimately I presume have a lot of sway in how this is managed, if they want to say, can we have a dispensation, I presume they get it. Would they not want to see their two best out halves locking horns in that pressurised environment to see how Jack Crowley responds? Instead,
we haven't had that kind of thing since Johnny Sexton went down in the Christmas of 2018 and went around Joey Carberry, headhunting Joey Carberry, and you could see like Thomond was up for it. Thomond was like, they booed. I don't remember ever hearing Leinster booed onto the pitch before. I know there's never been a lot of love from one province to the other, but like, it was fairly, when Prendergast went down that blind alley that time and got nailed and turned over, like, that was raucous. And that was basically the online sentiment that I've been reading for the last while, coming out in one stadium. And obviously, the Munster fans will always back their man, but their man was either on holidays or in a corporate box somewhere. He wasn't on the pitch. And I guess the other thing that we do, if you're putting yourself in Ian Costello's shoes, what was Billy Byrne's best performance in an Ulster jersey? Probably. It was New Year's Day last year against Leinster, when his kicking game, which is his greatest strength. He
did pick out Tom Mahern, but one nice one.
That tactical kicking to split the Brett Igo put up some good analysis of that kind of that tactic to kick. To kick it in between the two Leinster covering defenders, to bring them in, and then you attack the short side. That was a smart tactic. It didn't come off. He didn't play as well as he did on New Year's Day last year. But I guess you're going, okay, it's been too clever by half in my book. But I can see what the strategy is. But it did rob. Like, a lot of people paid a lot of money to go to that game. And I know it's a big social thing in Limerick every year to go to that game. And it's the one that always sells out. And it's such a marquee fixture. And often it's Leinster who've sent down a second string team, sometimes winning, but they have often taken this one as the one. But the fact that Leinster went down strong, I mean, Munster maybe hadn't allowed for that. Maybe when they made this plan 3 weeks ago, they hadn't allowed for the fact that Leinster would rest up for the home game and go strong in the away game. But Leinster definitely got their strategy right because they won both games.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Joey Carberry, Johnny Sexton bit of niggle. That was a great occasion. That's the last time Munster have won the Christmas game. I think it's a 5 in a row, maybe, for Leinster, if I have my maths right. Potentially not, though.
The record in this fixture overall, like, if you take out the URC semi-final and the Rainbow Cup game, it's blue all the way. It's pretty scary from a Munster point of view how little the mark. I know that the Rainbow Cup one I'd kind of park because it was empty stadium competition that nobody really understood.
Or URC semi-final. Why would you
URC semi-final was a proper. That was the one. That's the one outlier.
Well,
but even then,
they rested 15 players.
But that was their choice.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. No, I still counted. But
I still counted. But it does. When you see what the Leinster first team minus, like, imagine what would have happened if Barrett and Snyman were on that bench the weekend.
Yeah.
Keenan and a few others were fit.
What did you make of just the nature of how the game unfolded. Because Munster had moments of ascendancy. You know, they were held up over the line. The Ty Burns swivelling one, that seemed like a pivotal moment at the time. Obviously, right after half-time, Tom Ahern gets the score, but then Leinster go down the pitch because Leinster seemed to have an answer every time Munster got close to them.
Look, I think Munster did some stuff right, some stuff well. I thought their tactics were pretty good, but their set piece completely undermined them. And even if they got over the line in those moments, if you're being beaten up in the scrum and the line out like that, and you're facing, it's often Leinster's defence, like South Africa's, looks like it's about to break, but it doesn't. It's such a finite thing between breaking it and not breaking it. But so often, even though you can see the pass and up in the stand or on the TV camera, you can go, look, there's loads of space out there. Getting it there when Ringrose is hurtling up into your face is so hard to do. I never felt Leinster were that uncomfortable, even when they were on their own line with 14 men. They defended really, really well. I thought it was Leinster's best performance of the season so far. Munster probably caused them more problems in Croke Park when Crowley was on the pitch, and was probably one of the best players on the pitch that day, in what was, again, a comprehensive defeat. But this one, I felt like they kept them at arm's length pretty comfortably. I know Munster had lots of ball, but Leinster kind of want you to have the ball now. They're quite happy for you to do that, and then when they get it, they'll score in patches. I thought Ryan Baird made a huge difference to Leinster at 6. His line-out work is underrated. I think in the last year he has gone to another level in that regard. His carrying, if you think of that first try, it was his carry was the one that before Luke McGrath picks and goes over. Munster, that was a very soft score to concede. And a lot of Leinster's players played well, which is something we've kind of looked at and gone, they've won the game, but how many of them have played well? If you look, I know Prendergast got man of the match. I don't think he deserved it. I think, Josh van der Fleer is in exceptional form. Ringrose was brilliant. The tight five, Slimani. Like, there's a lot going. It just seems like the time together and a bit of cohesion. Leinster are starting to flow, and it's really good timing for them. They get a nice weekend off now, and then they head to La Rochelle, and for what is the biggest test of their season so far.
Yeah, Sam Prendergast, that was definitely one for the narrative, whoever picked man of the match in that one. I appreciated it, though. I thought it was very funny. And the Baird performance, I think, is a good point. He's an important player for Leinster and potentially for Ireland.
Yeah.
He didn't have a good end to last season. He's had a disjointed year this year. He's picked up a few head knocks that have take him out of games. It was a nice timely reminder ahead of Six Nations, where there is a vacancy in that back row at number 6.
Yeah.
Especially with, line out issues, which you mentioned there, he's really adding a lot to. So that was a really important, you don't often, we said we were robbed of one kind of head to head. Not that it was a head to head necessarily, but in those big derbies, if you put your hand up, it's very important. And I think he did his Ireland chances and even Leinster chances because of how they picked their back row. Very good job.
Look, I think he is a player who sometimes finds it hard to be consistent within games and can sometimes drift. I remember Jack Conan talking about it years ago, and it took him a while to figure it out that he staying present all the time and not allowing your mind to drift during games and let games pass you by a little bit. That sometimes happens to Baird. There's also these big moments that he's probably doing less of, but when he does them, it's making them. I think you've made the point before. He can make big busts, but executing off them is the
I'd rather
trick.
he did the line out work more so than the big bursts.
I know you said he had a poor end to last season. From about January to April or May, he was outstanding. He dominated that fixture last year. He destroyed Munster in the air, out of touch in Thomond Park. He won ball after ball. He was calling Leinster's line out in big games in Europe, and he played every minute of their campaign until the Champions Cup final when he was taken off early. And actually in extra time they probably should have engineered a way of getting him back on the pitch because they missed him when he went off. And then after that, I think the Pretoria game, he was very poor.
The costly drop ball.
Yeah,
now look, one drop ball, I'm not saying.
Maybe the minutes that he'd accumulated, he'd never done that before, and it caught up with him. But in the 2 tests in South Africa, he was outstanding off the bench in both games. He scored a try in the last minute in the first one, and in the second one, he was a big part of that kind of late surge for the Crawley one. I think he is such a player of such unique physical gifts that Irish rugby cannot afford to squander him. He's 25 years old. He's got about 20-25 caps. He's won 2 Six Nations titles. They seem to lose trust in him every so often, but always have to go back to him. But I think he's a player that if the coaches can recognise what they have with him, I think Nienaber does this really well. Put their arm around him. Hopefully he's over the concussions that he's had this season. I think he starts in La Rochelle.
I don't think it's fair to put the finger at the coaches and say if they recognise what they have. I think everyone knows what they have. I
think Ireland.
I don't think he's actually held up his end of the bargain sufficiently
sometimes
to demand inclusion. That would be my take on it. I agree with you. I think he's a fantastic athlete with a lot of potential. But for me, I would have expected him to have been further along.
Yeah,
and I put that down to him as much as coaching.
I think that's fair, but I think at the same time, and look, November was tricky for him because he just come back. Like this season has been disrupted by two concussions, and he ended up having to play for Trinity in College Park just before Christmas, which he apparently absolutely oh yeah, but he was playing with his brother and he threw himself into it and he loved it because that's where he started. But this season's been a bit of a write-off for him, but I think Ireland should have put him on the bench for the New Zealand game. Him and Casey, not picking him, going for the more experienced older players at that moment in this window. I thought that was a mistake. Now we ended up getting knocked out the following week against Argentina, but I think it's time to back him, whether it's from the start or off the bench. Because of the line-out issues and what he brings, both in the carry but also out of touch. I'm not saying drop O'Mahony for him necessarily, because it depends on what role they see O'Mahony having in the future. It's kind of time to unleash him as a member of your 23 on a regular basis, because he can change games and he can up the tempo in games as well, whether it's part of a 6-2 or whatever it is. In the Six Nations, he was such an important player for Ireland, and one of the reasons the Twickenham game got away from Ireland was they had him ready to come on when Peter O'Mahony got sin-binned, and not being able to bring him on. He became such an important player towards that middle part of last season, that second, third, and it did seep away, and that's what he's got to nail. He's got to nail the consistency, but he's so good. I still think he is ahead of Ahern, who I think is an outstanding athlete, and Izuchuku, who had a great game. Like, not having him in November was a big loss for Ireland, and I think he's at that point now where, yes, he needs to nail it himself, but he also is too valuable a commodity to not have in your 23.
Yeah, I even go back to the 2023 Grand Slam deciding game. I think he played second row that day, but he had a huge impact. Yeah. Remember, he was one of the key performers on a day when the guys around him were kind of struggling with the occasion. I thought he showed there like the impact he can have, but then you're looking and saying, geez, that's almost 2 years ago now. Yeah. Not that he hasn't played well in the interim. You cited a number of games there, but I agree with you. I'm be fascinated to see what the next few weeks.
He's one of the players, like, we're all looking forward to 2025 now, and him and Jamie Osborne, Sam Prendergast, who could have a huge year, but it's an important year for him, because if it doesn't go, if he ends up being another bit part player in the Six Nations, and if Max Deegan, for example, or even Jack Conan is picked ahead of him, really at 25, you're wondering, is he ever going to take this chance? So, I just, when I watch him, I just think he makes that Leinster pack a far more frightening prospect for an opposition. He's so physical.
One question I want to ask you: you wrote about this in the build-up to Christmas, about Leinster's style kind of diverging increasingly from Ireland's style, and how the guys who play for both teams aren't swapping as seamlessly between the jerseys as they did in the Stuart Lancaster era. The weekend's win over Munster again kind of magnified that style, like, the physical defence and the suffocation, very different to the way they used to win under Stuart Lancaster. Like, what do you make of that argument that you were making, in the sense of, like, the more success Leinster have with this system, does it make it harder for Andy Farrell in Ireland, or Simon Easterby in Ireland, to have that success that they've enjoyed in the last couple of years?
Well, one of the things that undermined Joe Schmidt towards the end was that the players were enjoying playing the Stuart Lancasters. Like, we do have this situation, fans of other provinces don't like it, but the vast majority of players are moving from blue to green and back again all the time. And one of the issues at the end of of the Joe Schmidt era was that things were going so well under Stuart Lancaster, and the players were really enjoying that comfortable in chaos, multi-phase style, that they were going to Joe Schmidt going, we want to play like this.
Yeah, Johnny Sexton has a good stuff in his book about that, going to Joe and kind of pleading with them almost to, can we do this more? And Joe's like, nah.
I mean, you listen to the World Cup review when Nusafora gave us the little tidbits from it, he talked about how failure to evolve was a big thing. So now you're looking at it going, right, look, I think they really like their style of play, their style of attack for Ireland, and I wonder if they'd like to marry the two. Is that what they're trying to do? Farrell is a defence coach in his own right, of high repute, who loves a bit of line speed, but he's not as aggressive as Nienaber. But I think he's open-minded enough to kind of listen to what the players have to say. And if Ringrose and a couple of the key, Doris, go to him and say, look, this is what we're doing, can we incorporate some of this into what we're doing? I think he's more open-minded than Schmidt would have been at that time.
But is that the right answer, though? Should Ireland be doing that? Like, I was thinking of it the other way.
I don't think I think what we don't have in this country is wingers like Cheslin Colby and Curtly Arenza who really make that system work, because there's that ability to turn and and cover that space with such speed is so critical to that. I think the midfielders can play it comfortably. I think Ringrose loves what he's doing. You can see it, the relish with which he
big tackles in Thomond Park.
Ended AJ McGinty a couple of weeks ago. He did it again at the weekend.
Who did he do it to at the weekend against Munster? I can't recall who it was. You got absolutely crunched. Mike Haley, maybe.
Farrell, maybe.
What
he's doing is he's obviously relishing, and the forwards are loving the approach at the breakdown where you go in and you make shit of it, basically, is what they say. That's what the language he uses. And you go in and you just make it a battle and a war. And they're doing that with Ireland. Ireland have incorporated that. And look, it's like leading to penalties. We saw massive concessions in the November internationals. And part of that was the overzealousness at the breakdown, and Joe McCarthy, Andrew Porter being given a license to go in and disrupt. But if you push it too far, it can cause problems. So should they be doing it? Well, like, the argument is it's won 2 World Cups and it is an incredibly successful system. I'm not sure it suits particularly that bit on the edge, and I'm sure Nienaber has adapted to the fact that he has James Lowe on one wing and one of Jordan Larmour or Jimmy O'Brien on the other wing, and that they're not the same. Larmour and O'Brien probably they're not as quick as those two players, but they're small and they can turn quite quickly. But Lowe is a different animal. He's brilliant at other stuff. So they have had to adapt to some degree, but they're definitely Farrell is smart enough to listen to what they're saying and go, okay, well, we take this and this and this, but we're not taking that. Like that would be a smart approach, and that's the beauty of having Nienaber in your system, is that you can kind of beg, borrow and steal. I'm sure he's learning stuff that he may take back to South Africa one day, or to whatever job he's going to next. But it seems to be mutually beneficial to some degree. But where there's a jarring is that in my opinion, it's taking longer for the players to roll from one camp to the other, and it's causing a bit of stuttering at the start. And you're seeing, what are we, 4 games into Leinster being back, maybe 5? We're starting to see them get into a rhythm, but it's taken a while.
But I do think their skills aren't as good as they were, and I think that manifested itself in November.
I think they're more tired,
but I don't think their passing and their handling is as good as it was.
Yeah, I think
that was a key part of Ireland being really good, is how crisp their handling was. I thought anyway.
Absolutely, and I think Lancaster would have put a massive emphasis on that during training. And if you're key voice in training, like Nienaber is the head coach at Leinster. I know his title is the senior coach, but even Leo Cullen was down doing lineouts before the game on Friday night. So he's intricately involved in as a forwards coach, really, because Rob McBride's more of a scrum coach. He's doing the lineout stuff. He's picking the team with Nienaber's assistants. But really, even watching Nienaber in action over in Bristol, where these English stadiums are often much closer to the coaches than we are at other games, he's the one making the decisions within games. He's
holding up the traffic cones.
Not quite there yet, but he was roaming the upper tier of Ashton Gate. There was no fans at that level, and he was on the radio mic all the time. The other coaches were looking to him for guidance as to what moves they play next. He's doing the in-game strategy. So it's, I don't know. It's an interesting one to kind of to view it, but their skills don't look as slick. Their attack is definitely not as good as it was. I thought it was better at the weekend. I thought there was a again, that comes from rhythm and training. But like, how much time are they putting into this defence, and how much are they being allowed to give to the attack? And Blindell, how much of a voice is he getting at training, and what's his focus? We're not really seeing enough of what he's delivering to kind of understand what he's got to offer.
It's 2 issues for me. There's the attack and there's the handling and the skills. And for me, it's the handling that concerns me as much as the attack. It's just because I associate Leinster and Ireland.
How many errors were there against New Zealand? Was it 23 handling errors? And then Australia was worse.
Yeah.
So that is a massive concern. Yeah. Andy Farrell can do a lot. Or sorry, he's not going to be there. I keep forgetting. But Simon Easterby and Paul O'Connell and all the Ireland coaches can do a lot. But they've got five training sessions for the Six Nations. Yeah. So they need to trust that Leinster are doing their work in that space. And
one thing I'm fascinated, we obviously saw the Nienaber influence, was this 20-minute substitution, Andrew Porter and Jack Boyle. For people who might not be aware of it, Jack Boyle was named to start against Munster Thomond Park. Great opportunity for a young player who's been mapped. He was a training panellist in November. After 20 minutes, Andrew Porter was brought on. We assumed at the time there was maybe a HIA or an injury. Not so. After the game, Leo Cullen called it a pre-planned experiment. And my initial gut reaction to that was, hated it, stupid, South African gimmickry that distracts from the process of winning the game. But then, having thought about it more now, I can see the logic. And we were discussing this off air, especially the rules governing front row substitutions. It's different to any other part of the pitch, whereby if you are replaced as a front row player, you can return to the field of play if there's an injury outside of a HIA or a blood injury. Like if someone tweaks their calf, you can come back on. That's not the case if you're playing any other position. So I suppose the wiggle room you get by making a decision like that is if Andrew Porter had gone down 5 minutes later, Jack Boyle could have just come back on. So obviously you want Andrew Porter or Dan Sheehan or Tyke Furlong potentially playing while the game was in the melting pot without him having to go 80 minutes to get to that point. So there is maybe merit to that. Like, what did you make of it, and what do you make of the logic?
And wasn't Cian Healy covering tight head as well?
Yeah.
So you had a fail-safe there as well, which obviously you're not going to have every time. Maybe not as visceral a reaction as you straight away.
I was extremely visceral.
I read quotes, cause at the time it kind of passed me by, and you just, as you say, you presume it's an injury, and you're like, oh, Porter's on, and you know, he's obviously not going to weaken the team, and you get on with it a little bit, and then afterwards you read the quotes, and I do think if you're going to do this stuff, like what Rassie Erasmus is very good at is explaining it. Or even Nienaber as well. They're very good at explaining their work. They let the cameras in for Chasing the Sun documentary. They are proud of their innovations, and they are happy to explain why they do it. Like say the Damien Valemsa calling the mark from a calling
a scrum from a mark
during the World Cup. That they're happy to show their work, even explaining why they had to. Like some of the decisions, I would agree with you are a bit too much. Like having 4 scrum halves never made sense to me at the World Cup, but what Leo Cullen probably didn't do, because Leo Cullen his natural inclination is to keep things in-house and guarded. I don't think he explained it particularly well.
He didn't explain it at all. He just said it was an experiment.
I think if you're going to do an experiment, I think you owe it to your fans a little bit to explain it to them, or certainly they will understand and accept what you're doing. Well, look, if you win comprehensively, they won't mind much anyway. But clearly Jack Boyle, I mean, anytime the camera went to him, he was having a great time after being taken off. So he wasn't unhappy at being hauled ashore after 20 minutes, or if he was hiding it very well. It was clearly part of a plan. But the more I've thought about it, the more I think this could be what saves Andrew Porter's
and
career
Tyke Furlong as well.
Well, Furlong potentially as well, absolutely. And it also gives you a real chance at managing their minutes in a way that you can't otherwise, because you could put Jack Boyle in there, and if he's going well, then you say to Porter, look, let's go half time this time, because you don't have to come on, and we'll keep you for next week, because we're already winning this game, and we'll get you a bit of a run, but we'll keep you fresh for next week. And you're talking about a player that I picked the top 24 players in Irish rugby the other day, and I think Porter's number 1 right now. And in terms of importance, he definitely is, because the drop off is so extreme. But it's a really good way of getting Boyle experience, both of starting a game, but also, as I said, if it's going really well, you can get him more and more minutes in. Whereas if a game's in the balance and it's 60, 70 minutes, like they left for Porter on for 80 in the Champions Cup final. Whereas if you start boiling that game,
he's
which
routinely playing 70 plus minutes, and let's describe 2 scenarios and see which one do you think sounds better on paper. Andrew Porter playing 72 minutes of a Champions Cup final against Toulouse, or starting with Jack Boyle or Cian Healy, and if it's going well, Porter comes on after 40, or if it's going badly, he comes on after 20. Like, that sounds probably better to me.
Absolutely.
And if obviously it doesn't work in other positions, because it would work, but you'd be mitigating the risk of injury. Then would be too high.
Yeah, it has to be front row, and the beauty is that it's front row. I guess if Porter comes on and starts struggling, which can happen in the front row as well, at scrum time, for example, you can't, unless you fake an injury.
If Porter's struggling, who else is going to be?
I know, but sometimes, like even the Ulster game the other day, like you change the picture. Like, so if the ref doesn't like the front row, it doesn't happen with Porter very obviously, but say if they started with Beelum and they brought Furlong on, and like Furlong's a brilliant scrummager, but sometimes he gets on the ref's wrong side, and you trust Beelum enough, you can't bring him back on without feigning an injury, which Ireland wouldn't ordinarily do. They're quite, they're generally above that stuff. So there is risk. There's a small degree of risk to it, but the more I think about it, the more I think it's just a really smart concept that for a player that Ireland need, both Leinster, Ireland, and even the Lions need to keep fit in the next kind of 6-8 months, and also a player who's approaching his 30s now, has a lot of miles on the clock. I always go back to Jack McGrath. So Jack McGrath became a test player when Cian Healy had his injuries, and Ireland and Leinster just got everything they could out of him for that 4, 5, 6 year period. And he was broken at the end of it. He couldn't, like when he went to Ulster.
After the Lions story,
he came off the bench in 3 Lions tests and barely ever played again. Like, he just couldn't do it anymore. Now the game changed and the game moved away from him, but the toll he carried for kind of carrying Ireland during that period was so tough. And Porter, they have to mind Porter a bit. I know he's a special athletic talent and he's a phenomenon really. But at some stage, it's going to catch up on him. And also, they need to have people ready to take the burden. And if you're only bringing Boyle on for 5-10 minutes at the end of games, and Boyle does look like like he more and more looks comfortable in that jersey. I didn't think they had to take him off.
No,
you know,
same.
I think they were trying to experiment, but like in that scenario where you're going, let's just see how it goes. I think they could have let Boyle on for 50, 60 the other day.
But I guess was the point to do the experiment and see how it
do
goes.
it in Thomond.
I agree. Like, what I like about it is that you have like kind of the built-in thing of if Boyle is playing well, you just keep him on.
Yeah. And this is where Nienaber, like, I'm sure I'm writing about this for tomorrow. Like when Leinster went to the RFU and said we want this guy, the RFU might have gone, hang on, you're putting the fox in the hen house here. Like, you're bringing over a guy for a 3-year deal. He could go back to South Africa with all, like, they're really like, they talk about their IP a lot, and like you're basically bringing in the World Cup winning coach of one of your biggest rivals on the international stage into the place where all your players are. There's got to be some reluctance when Leinster are going, hang on. He's going to look at us. He's going to challenge us. He's going to come up with new ideas. He's going to disrupt us in a way. He's also going to bring his defence. But the disruption and what I found most fascinating was like, how is he looking at these players and what they can do and what strategies can he put in place that make Leinster and Ireland better. And like, Farrell's got to be looking at that going, do you know what? That's
not a bad
smart
No.
idea. Not for every game, but
Yeah.
you know,
There's no doubting that like they're the only team looking at things in a very drastically different way. Everyone else kind of selects broadly similarly, makes their substitutions broadly similarly.
and they don't react to everything.
They don't do everything right, and they do get things wrong, but they also do challenge themselves to think of new ways of using
And no one's
things.
gone 7-1 really. Like, South Africa are the only team who do that, but like most teams do 6-2 from time to time, including Ireland. So they are kind of thought leaders, Nienaber and Erasmus. And yes, like, I mean, we've talked to Luke Fitzgerald many times in here about kind of the things that he thinks are a bit batshit, like, along the way. And some of them do. Even this one at first. And then you think about it and you're like, oh, that makes sense. And like calling the mark off the scrum, when they explain that, sorry, calling the scrum off the mark, when they explain that, it suddenly made a lot of sense. I mean, to me, it made sense on the night because they won the scrum penalty and it backed their set piece. Yeah. But it also killed France's kicking game. So they're not just thinking, they're thinking a couple of moves ahead.
Yeah.
It's why actually, you know, Felix Jones, there should be a bit of a priority on keeping him within Ireland somewhere, because he has been in that environment for so long. And like Flannery, get him back at some stage. They are thinking this way. They have had exposure to this kind of environment. So if Munster, you know, were to go and get him to kind of complement what they have, he would challenge the good coaches that they have there in a way that they're maybe not being challenged, because there is a bit of a groupthink with coaching in general across the world.
Yeah, I think Munster fans would love Felix Jones to come down. One man who's kind of ruled himself out with Stuart Lancaster. He came out in French media, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, denying what Andy Good had been saying on that podcast about how he was throwing his hat in the ring. It's still obviously a bit of a mystery. Looks like Mike Prendergast is still probably the favourite to get that job on a permanent basis, but was interesting to get some, I suppose, bit of insight from Stuart Lancaster as to what he's thinking, because his Racing tenure is not going very well. It would probably be a surprise if he's there longer than this season, but who knows? There has been links for him coming back to Ireland. What did you make of kind of the developments in the last few days around Munster?
Like, you know, Lancaster's name has been floated with regard to this, and I think a lot of it has been 2 and 2. It's come from a lot of kind of gossip, French rugby gossip websites have kind of been where it's materialised. I've heard it and I've gone and checked it out with kind of senior Munster sources, and they've put it on the kind of long finger. They've said they've kind of said it's not a great fit for us, and like Lancaster's wife went on social media about a week before Andy Good spoke about it and said there's no truth in this, and then Andy Good went on his podcast and basically repeated rumours that he'd been hearing. And obviously Lancaster's hit back very strongly. It said there's absolutely no truth in that whatsoever. And look, we all hear rumours all the time that we don't print or we don't talk about in here because we can't stand them up. So there's an onus on people, you know, people talking to not just throw conjecture out there, because it gets fans excited. It creates, or maybe not so, whatever way people think about Lancaster. I think Jones would be a better fit personally. My sense is that Munster are quite keen to go down the route of what they have at the moment, maybe with a bit of support. I think Chris Boyd is a really smart appointment as a kind of a senior figure, a guru to kind of help them manage through. I think he'd be a good fit if they could get him as kind of almost a director of rugby, with Costello looking after the succession planning and him helping out Prendergast and Leamy as Prendergast gets more experience. I think the fear from the RFU point of view is that it looks a little callow, like Anthony Foley's coaching ticket did between 2014 and 2016 when they went and got Erasmus, like Leo Cullens did in his first year before they went and got Lancaster. And my sense is that the RFU would like to bring in a senior hitter to kind of just sit above all those kind of young Irish coaches and guide them. Now, Ian Costello is very experienced. He's been a head coach at Nottingham. He's been an assistant coach at Wasps and Munster. But he doesn't. He said he doesn't want the role. He looks quite comfortable in it in some ways, but
he has an important behind the scenes role as well. That I wouldn't want to take him away from that, because I think that's a job that Munster needed, which is kind of a, I suppose, how would you describe it? Not director of rugby, kind of director of operations on the rugby side of it.
Like, I think it is. He's
not pulling together all the different
He doesn't do the
strands.
negotiations necessarily in terms of talking the money, but he goes right. We have this guy retiring in 2 years' time. How do we replace him? What's going on in the academy? They are far more aligned.
Very plugged into the club game as well.
Very plugged in, and they've done some really good work. They have a second stream of players who are kind of because their academy is less streamlined as Leinster's, where players are just ready made coming out of school. They've kind of almost a late developers program that they're getting players through from, and he's overseeing all of that, and it all feeds into the first team, which isn't functioning right now. But there are still a lot of injuries. They kind of seem to got over their injury hump, but they look so light at second row at the weekend. If you take Klein and a Dogbo out of that squad, scrummaging wise, they're in trouble. They're missing a couple of props. They're missing Peter O'Mahony, who still remains, like, they need to get him a contract if he wants to play on. He's too important to let retire. Obviously Casey's a big loss to them. So Leinster were down bodies as well, but their injury list is pretty frightening at the moment. And I wouldn't be against them pursuing the kind of homegrown go with what they have. I think Boyd would be a really smart hire, because what he built at Northampton, similar sized club, similar sized stadium, not in the big city, kind of away from the London kind of the big production lines, whatever. I think he could mirror what he built there on Munster and be really successful and challenge Leinster in a different way, because I think Munster have recognised they can't really do it necessarily with like a load of Leinster cast-offs. They have to grow their own. They have to be smart they can't go after big hitters in the transfer market as much as they used to, although I'm sure they'd like to have Snyman on board still, but they need to build their own way, and he's done a pretty good job at that elsewhere. Whether he wants to move to Ireland full time, I'm not sure, but if the IRFU are willing to pony up the salary and make it attractive, I think, Tony Ward wrote about this weekend, Bernard Jackman said it as well. This gap between Leinster and the other three is not good for the overall picture, because if Leinster start dipping, if anything goes wrong, there's not a lot there to kind of pick up the pieces. Now, it doesn't look like it's happening right now, but Richie Murphy's building something at Ulster, but it's going to take a long time. Connacht, they're struggling a bit. Munster struggling away as well. It's not a great overall picture. So I think investing in the coaching at those three provinces is key. And Jones will be another one that I would look at, although he's a very different. You're bringing him in as a kind of a boots on the ground, young coach with good big ideas. I don't know whether that ruffles the kind of the feathers of what's there at the moment. So the fact that we're still talking about it to me is a bit mad that they got rid of Roundtree went, what was it, before November internationals really, and we're coming into the new year and they still haven't got it sorted.
Ian Costello's quotes from after the Leinster match, it didn't sound like there was an appointment imminent. He said, we're taking our time, the process is the process, so we're going to have to watch. The break week, I think, comes at a good time for them to get some bodies healthy. You referred to a few injuries then. They have Saracens and Northampton back to back, which would be
Saracens looks a little less frightening after they were hammered at the weekend. But you wouldn't put, like, Sarries have players who can rise to an occasion, and Munster at Thomond Park isn't as frightening as it once was. And their set piece is really, really, like, the line out without O'Mahony is a big problem, and without Klein and the Dogbo, they're struggling at scrum time. And I think Bluer looks like a really good signing, and Jaeger. They need to get Jaeger on the pitch consistently and get games under his belt, but that scrum was a worry at the weekend. Because Leinster are good at scrum time, and at URC level they're pretty dominant, and Slimani has turned out to be a really good piece of business. But you want to get, like, Munster need a few more points on the board to be safe in Europe, and it's not going to be easy to pick them up in those two fixtures.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they get on over the next couple of weeks. Ulster 17-7 winners over Connacht, massive win for Richie Murphy, and Ulster really backs against the wall. Like, they had a load of guys missing. When the teams were announced, you would have thought Connacht bonus point victory was imminent. They had a pretty spirited showing against Leinster, albeit they ended up not getting any points out of that, which has proved very crucial over this period. 3 matches in a row in the URC, not a single point accrued. But it's about Ulster, really, I think. A funny night for the Richie Murphy household. Obviously, his son Jack starting at out half. Ben Murphy, his other son, coming off the bench. I'm sure that was a funny kind of Christmas period in their house. But what did you make of that performance? A few things jumped out to me. I thought James McNabney looked big and powerful. The back row, who people would have seen at the under-20s level. I thought Cormac Isashukwu, it's great to see a guy coming back looking like an international. Like, he looked the part of the guy coming back from Ireland camp. He was physical, he was mean, he was dominant.
Yeah.
Thought he was brilliant. And just, I suppose, the way they held out, their defence was really, really impressive as well. Like, to hold Connacht to 7 points, that it was some wastefulness on Connacht's part, obviously, but Ulster were really aggressive, rushed up really, really fast, got in Connacht faces and made life difficult for them. And overall, a real morale-boosting win. Like Richie Murphy said, like, look, a win is actually worth the same no matter who you beat, but at the same time, there's wins and there's wins.
Yeah.
And that is a real big lift for them.
Yeah, I did see that Richie himself and his wife stayed in Galway and they all went for dinner that night. So I'd say Ben was pretty quiet in the corner.
Thought he did well, actually. Yeah.
I thought he did, yeah. And I thought Jack, they were really smart about the way they managed him as well, because it was his first start. And I thought Nathan Doak stepped up really well. Like, there's a vacancy at scrum half for Ireland at the moment, and he's been in and around it. He's never been trusted, but I thought he looked really like mature and good decision making across the game. I thought Luke McGrath was really good for Leinster as well. It's a long time since he was in the Ireland conversation, but that was his best performance in a good while. It's really important for Irish rugby. Sorry, you want Connacht doing well as well, but Ulster in the doldrums is not a good thing, because there's a lot of players there. They may not be Ireland internationals this year, but if you look at Postlethwaite, Carson, you look at McNabney, you mentioned, there's a few players there who have real potential to kick on. And when you see them, and Izuchuku being the main one, but you see those players without Ian Henderson, who they've relied on for so long for that emotional lift. Alan O'Connor cries off before the game. He's a really important player for them. Timoney was brilliant at the weekend. But when you see a core of relatively young, largely homegrown, or players that have come through the Ulster Academy, pull it together like that and produce something, now Richie Murphy has something that he can go back to and say, look, you've done it for me once. Why not we do this again? Now, their European draw was really tough.
How do they approach Europe, do you think, next 2 weeks? Do they actually say, look...
There's no tomorrow, really, is there? I mean, they have a week off this week. They're losing
Leicester away, Exeter home. They're winnable.
They're winnable. They're definitely they're the more winnable of their 4 games. It's not easy, but Leicester are not what they used to be. Welford Road's still a hard place to go, and Exeter it should be a 5-pointer.
That was their first win of the season yesterday. They lost the first 9.
Still got good players, but I think you got to go no tomorrow and go for it. At least over in Welford Road, and if you've got a hope of even a Challenge Cup, you're looking to qualify for that competition. But it is important, because Richie Murphy's surely acutely aware of the fact that Dan McFarland was, left Ulster on a better run than what he's on at the moment, or what he was on going into this game, and Les Kiss probably similar before him. So you've got you have a project. Like, he's gone up there, they've slashed the budget. He's been asked to run a programme with young players, basically, with a couple of experienced players, a lot of whom were unavailable to him at the weekend. Big disruption losing your line-out caller and your hooker just before the game. Sorry, that was Connacht, wasn't it? They lost their line-out caller and their hooker, but they lost their hooker. Rob Herring pulled out before the game. Big disruption there, and their scrum was poor. Like, Scott Wilson looks like a terrific player, but he just needs to learn how to use his feet. And Donald Lenihan analysis really talked us through what was going on there. But they've got really good young players who have huge potential, but it's hard to win with them. They need to see it. So they saw it down in Galway, and now they've got something to build on and something to kind of get behind, and they'll welcome a few players back. It was an important win, but on the flip side, that wasn't good for Connacht, because
that was an awful performance. Like Pete Wilkins said afterwards how damaging it was for their season, and he wasn't wrong. Like, as I mentioned, that's 3 games in a row, 2 of which were at home. They didn't get a single league point.
Yeah.
The wastefulness in that second half, because even at 17-7, they had more than enough chances to still win that game. Like, it summed up the very end of the game, even when they actually went from try line to try line, almost to get a losing bonus point. And the last pass is just behind Sean Jansen. He can't take it in.
It was their one
he was
exceptional
class.
player. When he came off the bench, he made a huge difference to them. I thought Hansen played very well. I know we're going to talk about his comments. But when I was sitting in the press room in the Aviva Stadium after Connacht had gone very close to taking down Leinster, they were in a position, if one pass had gone, they would level or gone ahead in that game, and then obviously Leinster went down and won the game off the back of the error. And a pretty good performance in the Aviva, like a really good performance. And then there seemed to be a strategic decision that Mack Hansen would make the comments that he made, because he was sitting alongside Pete Wilkins, and it would be unusual for him to do media after the game in the way that he did, and he came in with something to say. So do you think
Pete Wilkins knew he was going to say that? Didn't look like
certainly he had a chance to stop it. sorry, Hansen had made his initial comments, and then Wilkins was asked about his comments, and after one or two words, Hansen reached across. You've seen the video.
He reaches across. It's actually a great video.
It's really interesting. I'm glad Brendan O'Brien had his camera there, because it really interesting that people got to see it in full as well. Wilkins could have said, Lana Mack, it would have been weird to have this interaction, but he was comfortable with him saying it. I think the feeling was that if Wilkins says what they think, as Andy Friend did a couple of years ago, Andy Friend has made similar comments, probably less vociferously, with less choice language, that Wilkins would have been in hot water, whereas they've gambled on the fact that Hansen's a player and they might not come down as hard on him. And we'll talk about that afterwards.
Popular and
having gone out there and said this, that everyone's out to get us, and the emotion Hansen spoke with was really, like, you could see it, hear it in his voice, how angry he was. Well, where was that? Him aside, because I thought he actually carried the game to Ulster and carried the fight to Ulster and was really good. But where was that from everyone else? What happened over Christmas? Like, that Connacht showed up so poorly in front of a full home game, in a game that they needed to win, a game that they budgeted. Like, they're in the Challenge Cup this year. They were disappointed again in the Challenge Cup, but the beauty of being in the Challenge Cup was that they could target these URC games. So to come away with nothing from the last 3 games, it's a disaster, really. Yep. And last year was really disappointing for this team, for this coaching ticket. Where's the response? It's like, you show the anger after the Aviva, and they played very well in patches in that Aviva Stadium game. Well, that had to come out on Ulster, because you were going out there looking at that Ulster team sheet going, we are better. Man for man, we have a better...
that's where the problem starts, to be honest. I think the team sheets, when they came out, I think that was like a complacent performance.
An extra bit of turkey.
I don't know.
Once you see the team sheet, you're like, okay.
No, honestly, but like that, the way they played, the prolificacy with the ball, the wastefulness around the try line, even the scrum that was dominating the whole game, they get that 5-metre scrum, you're thinking, now they get back in the game, they get marched back off their own ball.
And Scott Fardy was, RT went to him after 20 minutes of the first half, and he was just so glib about how poorly the team was playing, just talking about how passive they were. I often find those in-game coaching interviews are the most insightful that you ever get. And he kind of said, look, it's up to the players to find a way into this game. And until Jansen came on, they weren't finding it. And they were reminding me a bit of Ireland in November in terms of playing in front of Ulster, going wide. Sometimes you just love these teams. Argentina did it in November against Ireland. Like, nothing was going right for them.
Up the middle.
They just picked and went for a while. Sometimes you just got to win the fight and then go wide. Like that old phrase, earn the right to go wide. The patterns are nice, but they're like, Ulster were so comfortable defending it, and that Ulster team, you think they could have broken them up front. They could have just picked and went. They had Ireland forwards. I thought Bundyaki, he had some good moments, but for your marquee player, it happens too frequently. Connacht, he plays so much better for Ireland than he does for Connacht. He was disappointing. The errors that he made, the drop passes, that's poor. I know he still got them on the front foot, and there was a nice offload thrown in, and I'm not putting it all on him, but I expect so much more of him.
The line kicking was atrocious. Like, there's no two ways about it. Like, the missed field position, the one out in the full again in that final quarter. Like, Jack Crowley's line kicking was very poor. Then Cathal Ford took over. He was poor at the Aviva Stadium. His line kicking was dreadful. He looked devoid of confidence. Honestly, that's for me. I blame Pete Wilkins. No one can tell me there's not another guy in that back line who can do a better job at kicking the ball off the pitch.
Or if this guy's going to be a reserve 10, your backup, who is in the trenches, is playing 13, and is
killing them. It was absolutely killing them.
If you're going to ask Ford to do this, which is tough to do, I think, to be the 13 and then switch into 10 for the last 20 minutes of a game when you've just had 60 minutes at 13, and in training, like, the 13 has so much defensive onus on him. Like, he's got taken a lot of detail during the week, and I'm sure he's got a heavy enough burden. And then to be asked to conduct this, whatever about standing in a 10 and running the back line, to be asked to kind of have the soft skills when you've got maybe Piers O'Connor is a player that maybe could do that, or I don't know, Hansen has played 10 at that time, so maybe they need to lighten the load on Cathal Ford, because Cathal Ford 2 seasons in a row now has started the season really well, and then just it's not going for him now. He's losing form, and part of that is surely down to the load that's on him. I know I texted you during the Leinster Connacht game.
Line kicking generally in Irish rugby,
Sam Prendergast's side is not awful. Where it should be at all.
It's not. It's not. Even the way they're angling their bodies, I'm like, they're not even aiming towards like a good line-out position. I actually pulled my hair out watching every Irish team, and Prendergast, to be fair to him, has the execute. And it's not just a question of having the bravery to go; it's the execution piece as well, which is because oftentimes you see like Crowley and Cast, like Cathal Ford at the weekend, they go for it and they can't execute it, which is a major problem as well. It's not just about having bravery; it's about being able to marry that with solid execution, which very few out halves in this country seem to be able to do. I don't understand.
And it's the difference between getting 7 or 8 metres out and getting 5 metres out is huge for your maul. And then the Munster cast example is there was one where they, you know, it was a couple, and Leinster Connacht. You know, Connacht had chances to get to the 5 metre line, and their maul was going well, and they just kill, like, they're just absolutely stopping themselves from winning the game.
22 though, it's a penalty. Yeah, getting a penalty on your own 10 metre line and kicking it to the halfway line, as is what happens regularly, is you should be getting that near the 22. Yeah. A good out half should be, which is they don't even seem to try it.
And it is something that I think Prendergast, and we didn't really touch on him much, but like his form is catching up with his reputation, and one of the things that he has brought to the table is this pinpoint accuracy from his line kicks. Even the one that went dead against Australia, or maybe it was against Fiji, actually the smart ball technology said he got it in. It was just a mistake by the touch judge. His line kicking is superb, and he's getting Leinster into such great positions as a result, and it's going to get him into teams. Like, if his line kicking, it's such a key facet. It's almost like a forgotten skill within our out half play. I think Jack Murphy probably has it. I think we didn't see a lot of it at the weekend, but he's like Richie Murphy, having been a former skills and kicking coach for the Irish rugby team, has raised these two boys to kind of, you know, like the benefit of having that level of insight and coaching your whole life. I'm sure he'll bring that to the table. You know, if you go back to Billy Burns in Cardiff all those years ago, it can just kill a career.
Champions Cup final last year, Leinster to lose. Leinster got a lot of criticism for turning down kickable penalties. My issue wasn't that they turned them down, is that Ross Burns' line kicking was so poor that instead of getting 3 5 metre line outs, they had like 3 10 to 8 to 12 metre line outs.
Especially a player like Ross Byrne, whose USP is his kicking. That's something that he needs to get better at. If your kicking is going to get you into the team, especially when you've got a new rival now who is so good at it, it sets Prendergast apart. And when you see him do it so well, I'm not saying it's easy, but he makes it look easy, and that makes everyone else look bad as a result. But it is like when we go into these back-to-back European games now, where like every point is valuable. It's killing teams to not put themselves in that position, especially against the big French teams where it's really hard to maul them over.
Well, look, case in point, Exeter, their first Premiership win, semi-final against Saracens, who at the time were double champions. They get a penalty on halfway with a minute to go. Henry Slade puts it to the 5 metre line. Exeter win the line out, maul over, knock out Saracens, win their first Premiership. If that ball goes 10 metres out, Saracens, I would probably hold them up. Saracens go on and win, probably end up winning 4 in a row in that period. The difference between a good line kick and just opting for the conservative route or not having the execution to get a more aggressive one can be huge. And yeah, you mentioned that Cardiff one, like that. Like at the time, people were kind of giving him a pass. Oh, but he went for it. But he should be able to get it and go for it. Going for it is not enough.
I know he stuck around for a little bit longer, but that was it for him. As an Ireland 10, and he's never really recovered as a result. And it's the kind of thing. I know you were critical of Sexton, and he has missed them over the years, especially the World Cup quarter-final 2019. He had a couple of really bad ones, but he was generally very good at getting the most out of it. And we a little bit like the Irish line-out, we took it for granted until it was gone. And when the line-out's gone pear-shaped in the last year and a half for Leinster and Ireland in different games, and Munster especially, they suddenly you kind of pine for the days where you didn't have to think about it. You just kicked the touch and caught the ball. When they're like Connacht like would have just assumed, like, you get a penalty like that, the fans will just relax and start chatting because they just assume it's going to the 5 metre line, and almost they switch back in and go, hang on a second, we're miles away from the line because of a poor kick. And if you're going to ask Ford to do that, you've got to put a lot of effort into him, because it's not natural to him as far as I can see. But if you're going to go 6-2 and he's your guy, but like Josh Ioane's been the 10, and he's missed a couple of key ones this year as well.
Close friend of mine was at the Connacht game with his father, to Galway men, and he said, this line kick is going to give my dad another stroke. That's how bad. That's how bad the fans were. No, it was funny. That's how bad the fans were feeling. Okay, we've gone quite long, so just one quickly, just to tie things off. Mack Hansen comments. Should we expect a lengthy ban? Like, what do you expect?
I wouldn't say lengthy. My understanding is a letter has gone out to Connacht so that they can explain the context or what happened, and then action will be taken from there. I'd expect Connacht to stand by him. As I said, it's not the first time Connacht have raised this perceived injustice about decisions going against them. Andy Friend, after they lost to Munster in 2021, came out quite strongly and said this happens to us all the time. My sense from just speaking to a couple of people is that the fact that he was relatively general in what he said and he didn't attack Chris Busby directly will help him, but there's been such a reaction to it, and rugby prides itself on its values and all of that, and respect for referees, that the URC may feel compelled to act, whether it's a fine and some sort of suspended ban that you don't do it again, or even if they suspend him before the Challenge Cup games that he's not going to play. I wonder if there's going to be little bit of meeting in the middle. Rugby often, I can't imagine he's going to miss the Six Nations game over it.
Is there some sort of kind of verbal tackle school he could go to get like a reduction in a week or two?
I wouldn't like Mack Hansen to go. Like, I'm torn on this a little bit myself because I think he's. I was in the press conference. Connacht press conferences are very strange compared to other ones because basically Galway Bay FM get a little bit at the start on their own, but they go up to the front of the room so we can all listen to it. But we're all kind of tapping away at a bit of work because we know our questions are coming. And he said what he said before the video bit. And we were like, oh, what's this? So he came in wanting to say it. And God, like, I can't remember. I described it at the time as a remarkable press conference or whatever word I used, and I got a bit of blowback on social media. But like, when do you remember a player ever coming out with? And it wasn't a rant. It was very considered.
Sometimes, not players.
It was very considered. It came from the heart. And Hansen is a really interesting, honest personality in our game, and our game is devoid of personality a lot of the time. A lot of our best players have no interest in showing us their personality, so I'm really reluctant to hammer someone who's come in and made an impassioned case for what he feels is a sense of injustice. At the same time, I don't know how Chris Busby felt about it, and you know, Raji Erasmus.
The referees are being against Connacht. I don't see how that doesn't result in a ban.
Yeah, I think that's. But
no, and I agree with you. I love Mack Hansen. I'm not trying to
that's
say,
why I'm torn on it. Like, I think there probably is a slap on the wrist and a bit of a warning.
Yeah.
But I would hate to see him banned, and I would hate to see him kind of muzzled.
Yeah.
You know, I next time we see him, I hope he's as garrulous and as and he's often seen as a bit of a fun figure. Like, this was a serious, intelligent senior rugby player coming out and making a point about what he felt was an injustice, and I have some respect for that, even though I think it's the nature of being the smaller team in a big away from home in a big derby. You're going to get decisions. That's the whole point of being away from home. So I'm kind of talking myself in circles a little bit, but I'd hate to see him, like, you know, absolutely reprimanded and muzzled over it. But I do think he probably does need to have some sort of, the process has to be there so that other players don't feel like they can come in and just slate referees left, right and centre, which I don't think he did. But you probably can't do what he did. But it's a tough one because I just would hate to see people with personality feel like they can't show their personality.
There's a balance to be struck for sure between, you know, allowing that personality, but also we've seen some high profile figures in rugby go down somewhat similar routes and get decent sized bans. So I would be just fascinated to see how it plays out. Whether that is mostly behind closed doors and we just see the resolution, I suppose remains to be seen. But for now, Rud, thanks so much for coming in for me.
No worries. Happy New Year.
And later in the week, we will have an Indo Sport review of the year. And then Colin Doherty will be back with a football show as we move into 2025. But for now, thanks so much for listening and goodbye.